Welcome.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Janet Suter. If you'd like to know a little bit more about me, please would you link with me on LinkedIn. Today, let's get to our point, and that's we're going to be talking about digital transformation and just sharing ideas with you through our own experiences. And afterwards, we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. And we'd even like to invite anybody that's got something really great that they want to share. If they can put it on the chat, we'll be monitoring those chats. Today, I'd like to introduce one of our panelists, Rod Jones. With over 40 years of experience exclusively in the call center and customer service industry, Rod Jones is internationally recognized as a thought leader and a trusted advisor to corporates, parastatals, government agencies in South Africa, as well as in other African and Middle Eastern countries. As a professional strategic advisor, independent consultant, industry analyst, and professional speaker, Rod provides an extensive range of services concentrating on the strategic planning and the operational issues of call centers, contact centers, and customer experience and business process outsourcing. He was also the founder and first chairman of the Independent Contact Center Consultants Association, former chairman of the Direct Marketing Association, Teleservices Council of South Africa, and a trustee of the Thought Leadership Foundation. Rod has also served as chairman of the South African ISO Customer Service Standards Committee and as a judge for the 2019 BPESA Industry Awards and as an auditor for the 29 Dubai Government Contact Center Standards. Rod's positioning statement, and I love this, I personally love this, I help decision makers to make good decisions about call centers and contact centers. So when beginning a digital transformation, which is what we're discussing today, most organizations we work with are not ready to answer some basic fundamental questions that they need to answer before they start this amazing transformation. Are those questions and what are those answers? More importantly, that's what I'm going to be speaking about today. Do you have someone assisting you with your digital transformation, and are you getting the best advice? I know I get extremely overwhelmed with where technology is going and how to keep up. We often embark on digital transformation as we get extremely excited about it, and there's an immense amount of energy when starting out. We can also prematurely jump into a process without understanding or answering some of these basic fundamental questions. They're going to be providing a good foundation for your transformation success. So what we want to be covering today are some questions you should be asking before embarking on this exciting journey. You should have the answers to these projects. If you find yourself not having answers to one or more of these questions today, it might be a good time to take a step back and say, let's answer these questions before we get started on our journey to digital transformation. So what I'm hoping to achieve today is that we cover some light, shed some of our experiences with you. The first question to be asking here, which is one of the most basic, is why are we changing? Why are we going through this transformation? Oftentimes what happens in organizations, they think they have a really good answer, like we have to upgrade our technology in order to grow, or our software vendor is decommissioning an old legacy system, and they are basically forcing us into a new system. Those are really cool fundamental reasons for change, but they're not really good enough. You need more of a fundamental reason of what it is about and what you expect to get out of this project longer term. So one of the things you need to ask is, why are we going through this change? And it needs to be something more comprehensive rather than just because, or we have no choice. In my own personal experience, I always encourage the thinking that we need to take that a step further and really define what it is that we want to be when we grow up, or what they want their future state to be as part of their digital transformation process. So one of the best ways to unpack this, why we are doing this project, is to define the business value. What we expect to get out of this transformation, and these should be measurable metrics which affect performance matrices of our business. So we get back to the point that we need to define our digital transformation project, something just beyond we just have to do this project. Now, this is the time to define what types of business benefits do we expect? What experience do we expect? What do we expect the employee experience to be? How do we expect this to affect inventory sales, or inventory levels rather? How do we expect this to affect our supply chain or improve our supply chain? These are sorts of questions you need to be asking within the broader questions of what sort of business value do we expect? Now, once you have answered this question, you should start to quantify the business benefits and the business value in the form of a business case. I know we're building a few of our own right now, just to share our own experiences, and we'll be giving those out to our customers. There are already conversations taking place whereby we may ask some of our customers to be panel speakers in our next webinars, just to share their digital transformation journeys. So this is not only what your ROI analysis is, what you're going to spend. Excuse me, I've got a frog stuck in my throat. But to hold yourselves accountable and to make what business
Sorry, folks, we're having a technical issue.
And Aline, can I continue? Can I continue, Nolene?
Yes.
So this is not only what your ROI analysis is, or what you're going to spend, but to hold yourselves accountable and to measure what business value we get after the fact. You've got to remember that most businesses fail to realize this business value that they expect out of their transformations. One of the main reasons why this is because they don't adequately define what sort of business value they expect, therefore they don't achieve the business value. So it's very important to define what we want to get from this project moving forward. What are our business processes going to look like? How are we going to be structured? How is data going to flow through the entire organization? So when defining what your future target operation model is, it's important to think about it as what do you want to be when you grow up, and how you want to use technology and people and process to enable that future state. A lot of businesses mistakenly think they will defer this until they start deploying the technology. It goes with this whole concept of agile. The agile movement, people think that they just need to jump in and start deploying stuff. That's one of the worst things you can do, because you end up going aimlessly in different directions, which may not be aligned with what you want that future state operating model to be. So it's really important to define what that future state is before you start to deploy technologies, because ultimately that future state target operating model should drive the technology rather than assuming the technology will magically give you the answer on how you want to run your business going forward. It's a great sales message which works really well for the software vendors and the system integrators, but it's not a reality. You must define what the blueprint is, that business blueprint for change, and how technology is going to enable those business processes going forward. Just as we need to define the future state target operating model, we need to define our organizational design. How are people's roles and responsibilities going to change? How are people's reporting relationships going to change? Are we going to restructure? Those are our questions that need to be answered early in the project, ideally in parallel with and part of defining the business future state target operating model. However, in my experience, I call this out as a special question, as oftentimes organizations define the business processes, but then they forget to define how it affects the organization or how it affects the people side of change. And you really have to do both. So you want to make sure that you are identifying how the organization is going to change and what the future state organization is going to be going forward, again, before you start deploying technologies. This is actually an integral process. So you need to start the process of definition early on in the project and in the transformation. But as you get into these details of the technologies and you start to configure, design, and deploy technologies, you will start to understand in more detail at a more granular level what some of these changes are going to be and what the impacts are. But you don't want to wait until you get to the granular level of that kind of detail. You want to start that as early as possible in your transformation process. Once you've defined the purpose of your transformation, the expected value, the future state, operating model, organization's design, now you can look at what kind of technologies are going to best help us realize this future state vision that we have set for ourselves. Oftentimes, businesses pick up the technology first and then try and figure out the state and try to fit in within this. And this is a backwards way of doing that. Potentially, that might end up with the wrong technology at the very least. And even if you have the right technology, you're going to need to be aligned with that future state. So selecting technology that best fits that future state is critical. And you don't just simply put in technology that automates the way you've always done things that you want to, but you rather want to focus on that future state. So choosing the right technology that fits with your future state is something that is very critical. And the question needs to be answered early in your digital transformation strategy. Another question that needs to be answered in the planning process is understanding what the project roles are and who is going to fill them. When I talk about project roles, I'm not just talking about outside implementation consultants or software vendor roles. I'm talking about the roles internally within your business. Who's going to be the overall programming manager that's going to manage the software vendor and the software implementation consultants? Who's going to be your change team? What does that change management team look like? Who's going to sign off on the business processes? Who are the business process owners? What are the roles and responsibilities of the steering committees? What types of decisions do they need to be involved with? Lots of different roles that need to be defined. And if you don't have a good answer to these questions, it's going to cost you a lot of time and money, because either A, you're not going to have the right project governance in place to manage the project effectively and to the budget, or B, you're going to deploy technology without the involvement of key internal people, and it's going to get off track because you're not managing the project the way it should be. One of the ways to look at this is thinking to yourselves, your internal team is some sort of general contractor. You're the one that's going to bring the outsider resources and the internal resources that are going to support the project, but ultimately it's you that's going to be responsible for the overall success. If one of those roles is not being adequately filled, you can either try to change or coach the people to perform better, or you can swap out and bring the resources in that are going to better enable that future vision of what you're trying to achieve. But regardless of what you want, it's to make sure that you have all those roles clearly defined and you understand what the overall project governance is for the project implementation team itself. Another question to ask yourself is, what is our digital strategy and what is our plan? Lots of times organizations think, well, that's what the software vendor is going to tell us. That's what the system integration or implementation partner is going to tell us. Reality is you need to define what that strategy is and then bring in the system integrators and the vendors and the consultants to help you execute that. Now, you can certainly take input from the software vendors and the consultants and the system integrators. Don't get me wrong. I'm certainly not advocating that we must use only external resources, as we will, or not use external resources, my apologies, because we're ultimately going to need them. It should be your team and your decision of what that overall strategy and that plan is. This is important for a couple of reasons. One is that the software vendors and the system integrators tend to look at their project plans and strategies myopically from a technology perspective. But as an organization, you need to look at it from a more comprehensive perspective that includes non-technological things like change management, processes, improvements, architecture, and data migration, and all sorts of things that are going to be critical to this project. But they are not part of the software vendor or system integrators plans. So when we talk about making sure that you have a clear project strategy plan, it's important to not just defer to the software vendor's plan, because that will be part of the overall plan and making it fit in to accommodate your culture and what you're trying to accomplish. You're also going to have to augment that with things that your software vendor or system integrator does not do. So your overall program plan is a good way to think early on in the project. So just to build on a point that I made in a previous point, it's important to recognize that your system integrator is typically not going to be your silver bullet and the complete answer to what you need to make sure that your transformation is successful. Not only do you need internal resources, as we discussed earlier, but you also need to make sure that you are bringing the outside support to do the things that your system integrator does not do or does not do well. So this would include things like organizational change management, comprehensive organizational change strategies, and change tactics that work from a business transformation perspective is needed to augment the more core technology training type change management integration might do. Another example is business process improvement that oftentimes is its own stream within the project plan that should be managed by someone other than the system integrator. The system integrator or vendor might be providing you the technology to enable the process improvement, but ultimately it's up to you to roll those process changes out to the organization. A couple of other examples would be the overall system architecture and how the systems are going to tie together. You might have a core ERP system, for example, that needs to connect to a customer relationship management or a sales automation system, a human capital or an HR system, or a warehouse management or supply chain management system. Whatever it is, you're going to probably need some sort of integration between systems who needs to define that system architecture. And then finally, another example is data migration. Typically, clients are responsible for cleaning, mapping, and migrating data from their legacy system to the new system. The software vendors and the system integrators might be the tool set or framework on what to do, but ultimately it's up to you to do that. So typically what you can do is find a provider to assist with that data migration strategy. So these are just some of the things to think about as to the overall plan and what the strategy is. Make sure it's aligned with who you are as an organization and what your goals and objectives for the project are. And make sure you augment the system integrator with all the activities that need to support the overall transformation. So as we're leading to my second last point, really the important question here is that you need to ask before you start the transformation, are we aligned? Are we aligned internally? Are we aligned in terms of what we expect to get out of this project? Are we aligned as far as the expectations of the transformation plan and strategy itself is? Are we aligned around the project governance and decision-making? Are we aligned around what we want to be when we grow up? All these things we need alignment on. And if you're not aligned, then it's really important to take a step back, slow things down, and maybe hit the time out on the overall transformation and answer those questions to try and get aligned. So some key pointers here are alignment, clear vision, making sure stakeholders are aligned and moving in the same direction. Sometimes it's good to look for someone that could help or assist with these key areas so that everyone is rowing in the same direction, so that you're not dealing with the headwinds of misalignment. Those headwinds of misalignment will slow your project down and cause a lot more cost than you can imagine, or even create friction in areas or sour very good relationships. In fact, that misalignment is one of the biggest risks that businesses face. So it's really important that you overcome this misalignment issue and make sure you are aligned to start with. And you might get misaligned again and get off track throughout the implementation of the transformation. But at the very least, you want to have that alignment as you start the project. So as we come to an end, how will we be accountable? The last question you need to ask yourself before you start your transformation is, how are we going to hold ourselves accountable for the success of this project? Who is going to be accountable for this? You ultimately need an executive sponsor, the ultimate point of authority and decision-making in a project. But in addition to that, no one person can be the single point of accountability. That's just not enough. You need other people to support that as well. You need to define who is going to be the responsible person for each area of the business and its benefits, and what you expect to get out of the system. Who is accountable that the project stays on track and sticks to the budget? Who's the person that gets the right resources internally on the project? And if they conflict with priorities, who's responsible for getting those priorities clarified? Those are just some examples of accountability that's very important, not only during the transformation, but also post the transformation. We need to make sure people are accountable for making sure that this transformation doesn't just get delivered on time, but on budget, but more importantly, delivers the business value that you expected. And it doesn't disrupt the business operations in a negative way or affect operations in its financial results. So it's really important to think about this from a benefits realization perspective and accountability perspective going forward. So these are just some of the things you should be asking yourselves. And again, if you don't have good answers to any or one or more of these questions, I highly encourage you to pause your transformation. Resist the temptation to just bring in the system integrator or the software vendor to come and help figure out for you what's going on, because ultimately these decisions are only ones that you can make and that you can answer. You can certainly ask for input and advice from others, but it will most certainly be up to you to make those decisions in the ways that make sense for your organization. So I hope you have found this information useful and it adds some light into the digital transformation process. So what we will now do is head into some questions, and the panel, Rod Jones, again, who I introduced earlier on, we will try and address these questions for you. And don't think I'm rude if I'm looking down, it's because I'm looking at the questions that are coming in. So yeah, let's have a look at some of these questions that are coming in.
Janet, if I can just come in here and just to support you on something here.
Thank you.
You were talking about planning for this digital transformation.
Yes.
The quotation I often use is one from Napoleon Bonaparte, who said, men, horses, and cannon are useful in battle, but it's the strategy and the planning that win wars. And
Wow.
we use that a lot because without the kind of planning behind where we're going on this one, it's almost impossible. You mentioned, future state, and a lot of clients that I've worked with in the past who run headlong into this process with a big bang approach. We're going to do everything. We have omni-channel, we want WhatsApp, we want SMS, we want everything all at once. Big bang, in my experience, tends to end up in a big bang, an explosion of disaster. So I totally support you on the planning side of things. I see one of the questions coming in is about enterprise architecture framework. Are you going to answer that one, Janet?
If you could answer it, Rod, that would be great.
Yeah, I think, the point here is there are many different methodologies and processes, but yes, a framework way up front to scope the project, to understand the metrics of it, etc. The second question coming in is of how do you get buy-in? And I think the two go hand in glove. If I wanted to sell a group of people on the idea of a long weekend in Cape Town, how do I get them to align? I show them a picture of Cape Town or a documentary. So it's to paint that very clear picture of the end goal and the journey. And that's when these methodologies come into play, is the necessity to, first and foremost, actually, in my opinion, is start your baseline. There are very few organizations will actually have the guts to do a hardcore audit to say, where are we? Where are we? The problems and all, good, the bad, and the ugly. Because the solution is the journey and the end goal is utopia. So my recommendation in all of these type of projects is start with a baseline audit and really understand the existing operation. Now, depending on which audit tool you use, we use several different ones, but they're between 600 and 800 checkpoints in a typical contact center. And in many cases, those answers aren't immediately available. You've got to dig deep for them. And also be bold enough to recognize the warts and all. Where are the real problems?
Yes.
In Jim Collins's book, Good to Great, one of his principles is face your brutal realities, no matter how hard they might be. And that now takes us to the frameworks. And there are a number of frameworks, either coming out of the IT environment or in our world of CX contact centers. There are a number of tools available to do that. Janet, back to you.
Thank you, Rod. There's a question that's come through. What is the best way to get user adoption for new systems? Rod, with your 40 years of experience, you've confronted this or been involved in it so much. How would you answer that question?
One of the things that we find in majority of contact centers is there's a lack of analysis around the financial implications. I mean, I stand up in front of 30, 40 people when running a seminar. They could be call center managers now. What is the cost per minute to handle a call in your call center? Very, very few people actually know that. It's only really the BPOs that understand it. Because my position is no matter what we do, no matter how much we want to invest in this digital transformation, it's money. And to get those authorizations, to get the buy-in, we have to tell a money story. So if we want to deploy a full omni-channel solution, the question is, why? Are we going to save money? The boardroom's not interested in a vague statement like that. They want to see, if we do this, we're going to reduce call volumes by that, and every call that we handle costs us 6 Rand or 5 Rand or 40 Rand, whatever it is. And so we've got to educate ourselves to start with financial modeling and build the case around that. People get really excited when you show them how much money we're going to save or money we're going to make. And that to me is the key to getting buy-in, not only at an executive level, But at an operational level, when operational teams actually start understanding the financial implications, they start seeing, well, if I can participate in this, if I can contribute to either making more money or saving money, I'm going to be the shining star. And when people see the opportunity to become a shining star, that's when they really start participating and contributing to the process.
Exactly. Thank you, Rod. So there's a lovely one that's come through here. And this is to everyone. What is the narrative do you use to get the change management conversion in the room during digital transformation when technical requirements are key? Besides buy-in and adoption benefits and desired outcomes, is to ensure alignment around people's people and behaviors.
I think, you know, once again, it's painting that very clear picture of the end goal in terms of ease of operations, slower time to market on new products and services, reduced customer complaints, faster time to close sales, quicker and more effective and more efficient collections, for example. So all of these, if we can project those figures into the future and to say, this is where we're going, and these are the stats that we are going to start seeing. There's our baseline stat or whatever it is, or whatever set of KPIs we have. And as we start deploying and integrating and optimizing new technologies, new systems, we're going to change processes. We're going to change some of the training and skills necessary. And the end goal is this. So it's from this to that. And I always say, put financial figures to it. It's no good saying we're going to save lots of money. We're going to save 1.6 million rand over the next year, and our ROI is going to be, 6 months.
Exactly. Here's a really, really interesting one, Rod, specifically for you. Are there best practices that can be shared? I'm sure a lot of organizations have gone through all this with some lessons learned on how to streamline this approach. And I think you've got a lot to offer there, Rod.
Well, if I can just flash us a one slide up on the screen here. Are you seeing the screen?
Yeah, I see your diary.
Yeah, you see my diary. We don't want to see my diary. Let me move this across. Give me a second. There we go. You should see that.
Yes.
Okay. This is the COSAM model, and that's challenges, objectives, strategies, actions, and metrics. That's what that stands for there. And this is really just a template, but where we are looking at multiple channels, the omni-channel digital migration, email, we've got WhatsApp, we've got Telegram, we've got video channels, a myriad of these things. And the vendors will come along and say, we've got everything, just buy our stuff and switch it all on.
Exactly.
Big bang, big problem.
Yes. Yeah,
So,
that is a big problem.
Yeah. So I literally, and you working with clients, work through and say, well, before you do anything, what are the challenges? Give me numbers, percentages, figures, as you can see here. So challenges. And what's the end goal? What do we want to achieve out of this? And be quite detailed about it. So in order to achieve those objectives, what are the strategies we need to do? And this is long before we start buying toys. Actions to get there. If we're just looking at the email channel, let's analyze, let's understand, let's design the to-be process. Then, of course, they're your metrics. Let's have a hard look at the metrics. What do we have at the moment? Where do we want to get to? Look at this: man-hours saved, cost saved, revenue generated. All of these things critically important. Then, of course, the business outcomes. This is what the boardroom wants to see or hear. And only then do we get to, okay, how much we need to invest in this as a project, etc. So a very simple framework and a very simple but difficult to implement discipline is to get the teams. And I think one of the delegates asked for, getting teams. How do we get teams to buy in? It's by getting them to participate in these type of exercises. Running these CoSAM models, team leaders, supervisors, even agents, get them into the room, whiteboard it. And when you've got a set of these for each channel, now you've got the architecture to say, okay, this is the journey we're going on. And there's just another point I wanted to make on, there it is, the sort of timelines. And okay, this is an old slide, but if we were to try and implement all of that in the first quarter, we're heading for disaster. So, right, with modern platforms, this is an old slide, with modern platforms, 6 to 9 months, maybe 12, to roll out a total deployment of a full omni-channel solution. But, it's look at it in the components and then the bigger picture. That's my story about CoSAM.
Thank you, Rod. That was very, very well answered. Here's another lovely question. I almost want to giggle a little bit, actually. How do you get your staff to stop using pen and paper and start using systems in place to keep notes and callbacks? I almost want to say remove the pen and paper. Rod, how do you,
I think, like many things, it's a combination of training, coaching, and disciplining. There comes a point in time where you can coach as much as you like, but if the behavior doesn't change, it moves to the next level, which is disciplining. You might add another one in between there, which is incentivization. That, and if your system is measuring utilization of whatever it is, it shouldn't be too difficult to both incentivize on the one hand, discipline on the other, with coaching being the glue that holds it together. As you said, throw away the pens and papers. In fact, in many contact centers now, particularly PCI compliant call centers, no pens, no papers, no notes, nothing.
I want to add to what you're saying there, Rod, is also is to look at what's being used. Is the user experience difficult? Because then they're going to stick to old ways of doing things. Have I frozen again?
Yeah.
What'd I do?
I'll come back. Hang in there.
We can still hear you.
Oh, my apologies. Okay, so then I'll continue talking. But yes, so it's almost if the user experience is a difficult one with whatever the transformation is, they're going to stick to old routines.
Yeah, and very often you'll find that it's the process itself that needs refinement, re-engineering, in consultation with the users, as opposed to coming down from the higher echelons of management.
Correct. So here's a lovely question as well, Rod. With working from home, broadband costs, stable connectivity and power, etc., are these things, all these things need to be taken into consideration? I'm not sure what the question is there, but yes, those do need to be taken into consideration. I don't know how you want to maybe address that.
I think, broadband, never mind costs, but reliability, utilization of broadband, etc., all factors. And we saw this happening in the early days of lockdown, where large numbers of organizations deployed agents, work from home, provisioned with laptops and various routers. And where there was fiber, there was fiber. Where there was none, then it was 5G or rain or whatever it is. And then, of course, there are certain areas that have worse connectivity issues than others. And I think it comes back to a workforce management component here as well, to be able to say certain agents, we're going to keep them on pure voice. Other agents where we don't have good connectivity, we're going to deploy them to handle non-voice and text-based. So a combination of those, and certain platforms today do allow for almost an automatic switch from high bandwidth availability to low bandwidth, and therefore channeling and routing interactions by types according to the availability of connectivity. But I think, Dean, it's a really good question, and particularly in South Africa today, where we have bandwidth issues in different areas, and of course, let's not even talk about load shedding. Those are very real considerations. And I think it's interesting that it's from a connectivity issue is now impacting into workforce management. How do we deploy and how do we utilize people? Nice question.
Yeah, it's a lovely question. Unfortunately, I can't do anything at the moment. I'm so super glad people can still hear me, but I can't stop my video. I can't restart. I can't mute. I can't do anything. It's just hanging. So apologies for that. So I can't even see any more questions coming through. Are there any more questions that are coming through, Nolene or Rod, that you can see? I don't want to miss anybody or leave anybody out.
Rudy's got a nice question that came in around, identifying a customer use case and what component channels are needed in order for a client to reach their end goal. And I think that the point I raised earlier about using a framework or a tool set like the COSAM model works really, really well, but it's only going to give benefit if we have that baseline. And having audited hundreds of contact centers, I sometimes shake my head at organizations that don't do that, because they're dragging old habits, old processes, old systems, anecdotal knowledge into a future, into a digital future that cannot exist on old-fashioned ways in which we've done things for 50 years. Some of us have done it for 50 years.
Rod, that's great. That's great. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Rudy. That's a great question. Are there, again, I'm just relying on my panelists, Rod and Nolene, who's controlling the chat there, and Paul. Are there any more?
Now we seem to have lost Janet audio as well. Okay, Janet, you can come back now. I don't see any more questions, but whilst Janet's wrestling with technology, please feel free to input any questions here, even if it's not quite relevant to the discussions. We do have answers, happy to share them. Here we go. Yeah, this is from David. David, yeah, good point. Digital transformation more business transformation, and technology is just an enabler? Absolutely. And I think one of the big problems we see is far too many organizations leap in, commit themselves to really expensive technologies before doing the necessary homework that we've been discussing all morning. In fact, it's one of the questions I get asked frequently as a contact center consultant, is the question comes, what's the best technology? I pause, take a breath and say there's no such thing as a best technology. There's the most appropriate technology to your end goal, and there's the most appropriate partner to your end goal. And those two together will provide the magic and the safe transition from old state to new state. And David, you're quite right. It's not an IT project, and many of these projects have been driven by IT in the past, where the selection of technologies, a lot has been done on the golf course. And you're quite right in saying it's a business process project. And if we get the business processes right, then we will find the appropriate technologies and the appropriate partners to build that model. Any other?
Okay, they seem to have fixed me. I'm
Got
back,
you
Rod.
Good, good.
Yeah, I think what Eric's saying there, I think his challenge is, so he believes in the whole transformation. He thinks he's doing a pretty good job, or they're doing a pretty good job. But I think his question is how do you address I think
let me pick up on that one, because I think John Harley, nice question. Transferring everything to digital, how long do you think it will take before we're able to remove the human aspect in the new digital world? It's a question that comes up a lot, and particularly I do a lot of work in youth job creation space, working with organizations like Harambee, etc. And it just takes me back to the early 80s when IVR, interactive voice response, was first introduced commercially into our contact centers. And everybody went running around saying, well, that's the end of call center agents. Well, at that time, we had about 8,000, 9,000 agents in South Africa. And today we have close on 200,000 agents. So we're seeing more and more of, in fact, job creation through digitization. One of the questions, I was on a panel yesterday with, as you can see, Corby Speech Analytics, we do a lot of work with. And there's been a terrible fear amongst QAs to say, oh, well, here comes technology, our jobs are going to become redundant, because speech analytics can largely do 100% of scanning of calls for compliance, et cetera. But what we are finding, in fact, is that QAs, their jobs aren't made redundant. In fact, they become insights analysts. So all of a sudden, you've got somebody who used to be a QA, now they're feeding business intelligence into the organization, up into the boardroom, and their jobs become more valuable. So, you know, there's another transformation that's happening. We're moving, I think, as we get more and more technology kicking in, we're moving more towards a super agent role, where we desperately need people, agents who've been with the organization for a long time, who really know the processes and the systems and the politics. Because when customers have tried self-help, they've been on the web portal, they've done some chat, and they're still not getting what they want, when they call that call center and actually get through to a live person, they don't want to hear, I'm going to escalate, I don't know, I don't have access to the information. They need that super agent, and they need super systems to support that super agent. So bottom line is, nowhere in the world am I seeing headcount diminishing. Even in the UK, where text and text-based interactions have now surpassed voice, it's nearly 60% according to the latest Contact Babel research. So as the telephone interactions are dropping, digital is expanding, headcount's expanding. So yeah, it's good news for job creation.
But what I like what Eric's saying is that it's not digital transformation is not an IT project, but actually a business project.
Yeah, and I think in many respects, particularly in the whole CX world, we've got to wrestle our world away from IT.
Yes.
And become more assertive in, guys, this is what we need, not being told we're deploying this fancy new stuff that somebody saw in a conference in the States.
But I think that's what the challenge is. How do you convince the executives that it's not a IT project, but rather a business project?
We do it by numbers. It's about rands and cents. It's about the ka-ching in the boardroom. Now, IT, we love you to death, guys, but money and CX and customer experience and revenues are not your game. You're the plumbers, and we can't exist without good plumbing. So
yes. So we're going to start, because I think we've only got about 10 minutes left. So we're going to try and take a few more questions. So there's one from John Harley. With transferring everything to digital, how long do you think it'll take before we will be able to remove the human aspect out of the new digital world? That's a question that's come up time and time again in most of my conversations, by the way.
Yeah, I think my answer is we're going to continue to grow the headcount because customer service is about human interactions. And with the machines got a long way to go. I know there's lots of AI and bots and all sorts of lovely stuff, but in fact, it was the head of digital transformation at BT in the UK who said technology is great and processes are great, and there are some technologies that can do it, but they can't do complex emotive issues.
Correct.
And contact centers are complex emotive places.
Correct.
So, you know, not in my lifetime, which isn't as long as some of the others, are we going to see total technology taking over completely from people. In some areas, absolutely. But you know, one of the things which I find fascinating is with this mad scurry, particularly in Europe and the States, into digitize everything, automate everything, bot everything. I won't use the rude phrase about bots, but what we're now finding there's a whole new breed of BPOs and outsourcers setting up shop to handle digital failure. A large pizza chain in the States right now is looking to outsource about 1,000 seats, and they're looking at South Africa for digital failure because they went totally overboard. They get a consumer kickback. Another interesting piece of development in this space is the Spanish government has introduced legislation. If you've got self-service, they've set standards and parameters around it. You absolutely have to have human support on that. That's likely to escalate into the EU. It's likely to escalate into the UK, and I would totally support it here as well. So digital failure, and a lot of that is because it's been done with a big bang approach. 100% planning, and also too much faith in the ability of technology. Yes, we're getting there, and it's developing fast, but we still need to tread softly.
The projected growth, specifically in Africa, even into 2050, is massive. I've been looking at those stats, and they're incredible. So here's a lovely question from here is, what would the best way to approach the mapping of business processes end to end?
One of the things that we've found about business processes is, if I go back to doing audits on call centers, walking into any call center, you can feel it within seconds. It's either getting somewhere or it's toxic. If it's toxic, the chances are nobody's bothered to really map the processes correctly. They're mostly anecdotal. People do things because it's the way that it was always done. And so stripping it down to bare minimum. And one of the challenges we have is that in many cases, processes have been designed by some external consultant or division in the organization. We start with literally workshopping with agents and team leaders and supervisors, and literally mapping it out on whiteboards and flip charts and say, how does this work? Agents in many cases know better ways to do things than management. So the best way to approach mapping is to break it down into granular levels, all the processes and sub-processes, and literally work it through. One of the exercises I do in a seminar that I do is to make a cup of tea. I've run a workshop with about 40 people, and we ended up with over 250 sub-processes to make a cup of tea. And it's important to get down to that granularity, because once we have that, we look for areas for shortcutting, use of technology, streamlining processes, streamlining escalations, etc. So start at grassroots is, my advice on designing processes end to end.
So we need to start wrapping up. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us today on our thought leadership and just sharing ideas of our own experiences. Dean, thank you. He's added a great comment at the end here to say onerous processes force the agents to find quicker and better ways to do things. Thank you, Dean, for your input there. Much appreciated. Rod, I would just like to say thank you so much for sitting on our panel today and answering all these very, very good questions. It's been very insightful, very interesting. Thank you so much again, and I do apologize about the technology glitches, but we work around them. With all our outages and ESCOM challenges, my goodness, we've had to get really creative and colorful with how we do business. Okay, so thank you very much. Really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.
Great stuff. Thanks so much for the opportunity, and it's been a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you.